Welcome to our third video of Fur Trade Paddling School. Today, Jim and Doreen will explore some of the personal stories of the voyageurs who participated in the 1967 Centennial Canoe Race. Take it away, Jim and Doreen.
Welcome to video 3 in this series. This is again about the 1967 race. As a famous paddler and filmmaker once said, when you paddle a canoe, you journey with those who have gone before. This was so true of the paddlers in the Centennial Canoe Pageant as they were traveling along the old fur trade route, depicting the voyageurs at each stop and the communities along the way. As the journey progressed, the paddlers felt more and more like the old-time voyageurs. As promised, this third video of the series is more about the race, but not only is it the longest race in the world, there's so many stories to tell. This time I want to tell you about their adventures and some of the funny stories and exciting moments. Rocky Mountain House, right where we are right now, was the setting for the beginning of this historic race. There were over 10,000 people ready to see them off. The paddlers were excited knowing that they were about to reenact a part of Canada's history. But as most of them were canoe racers, the biggest excitement was knowing they were taking part in the longest canoe race in the world, in an 8-meter or 25-foot canoe, just like the one behind us. After all the training and paddling and ceremonies, they were about to race 3,283 miles, or 5,283 kilometers, in 104 days, approximately 4 million paddle strokes from Rocky Mountain House to Montreal. And one of the paddlers actually figured that out. He's an accountant, and he set to figure out that it was 4 million strokes. Finally, the start gun went off, and the race was on. The big canoes were painted to resemble the birch bark canoes of days gone by, and bore crests of the provinces and the names of the explorer they were honoring. The paddlers wore different colored headbands and brightly colored voyageur sashes and team shirts. It definitely was a pageant as well.
Race times were taken each day. They also did sprint races for prize money at most stops along the way. They were communities. The stops were communities as a way of providing excitement for all the people who turned out to cheer them. Sprints were like a race within a race. Times for sprint races were added to times for the daily distance races. The lowest number of minutes at the end of the race would determine the winner. On the second morning of the race, they performed a 2.5 kilometer or 1 3/4 mile sprint race for the crowds, and New Brunswick was excited to be ahead, but they missed a turn and 4 canoes went racing by them. On the return lap, paddling against the current, they got stuck on a sandbar, and as they had to get on and walk, alas, they ended in 6th place. This kind of thing happened every day of the race, making the teams more and more competitive as the race went on. And believe me, they were super competitive. These were racing paddlers. We were lucky to see the voyageurs do a sprint race in Saskatoon on June 4th, 1967. I'll never forget it. It was very exciting, but little did we know that Doreen would then write a book about their adventure. Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra, cousin of the Queen, was visiting Edmonton with her husband, His Honour Angus Ogilvy. They saw a sprint race that was won by Alberta with a race prize of $700. During the ceremonies, His Honour noticed that John Nicol from the Alberta team was wearing a beautiful, homemade, home-tanned leather beaded jacket. And when Nicol realized His Honour liked the jacket, he quickly removed it and gave it to him. The following day, a messenger found Nicol and gave him an envelope marked, "Deliver by hand, urgent." It was from His Honour. It seems the $700 Alberta prize that had been given to Nicol was in the jacket pocket, and he received it by hand. The voyageurs paddled through dust storms, rain, blistering sun, hail, and wind. Each day was a new and exciting challenge, and each day was another round of feeling like rock stars as they were greeted by the communities along the way. An old-time voyageur said, "There is magic in the feel of a paddle and in the movement of a canoe, a magic compounded of distance and adventure." Even Mother Nature didn't dampen the spirits of those involved in the race. For them, This centennial canoe race was magic.
One of the most beautiful incidents happened in Saskatchewan. They were paddling through the mist and they could smell the beautiful aroma of wild roses in the distance and in the stillness. A few minutes later, the mist rose, and on both sides of the river were blanks of wild roses glistening in the sun. On Lake Manitoba, they came upon their first big lake challenge as they paddled in 4.5 meter or 15-foot waves, but nothing like the big waves that they'd have to deal with in Lake Superior. In the fur trade days, the voyageurs used to have races on Lake Manitoba, and bets would be made as to which group would paddle the fastest. No quarter was given. If a man fell overboard, he was lost because no one would stop to pick him up. They often bet their entire load of furs on these races. Voyageurs of old often got killed in the rapids as well. It was quite dangerous. In 1967, voyageurs were fierce competitors and raced hard, but there were safety boats along, so no one would get left behind if they fell overboard. There were 68 portages in this race, totaling about 113 kilometers, or 70 miles, but the longest was 31 kilometers, or 19 miles from Delta to Portage La Prairie in Manitoba. The most celebrated was the famous 15.5 kilometer or 9-mile portage at Grand Portage on the west end of Lake Superior. This went over the famous height of land. Along the Canadian-U.S. border, they got storm-stayed in a remote area by big winds and huge dangerous waves. Their trucks and supplies couldn't get through to them, and they were getting pretty hungry before the waves were calm enough for them to move on. So 2 voyageurs caught fish and spread the fish around, and word got out that they had a problem with all these hungry paddlers sitting on an island. So the Canadian Signal Regiment managed to get them some food brought in by aircraft, including a huge amount of ice cream in brick form. Back in those days, you could get bricks about like that of ice cream in different kinds. And they had so much ice cream brought in that there was still some left when the officials gave them the word to move on. So know what they did? They had a snowball fight with the rest of it.
When the teams got to the famed Grand Portage, where the fur traders exchanged the furs the winterers brought from the west for the trade goods the pork eaters brought from the east, they got pretty emotional, realizing they were following the footsteps of history. Grand Portage, at the height of land between the east and the west. All the waters from the east side flow to the Atlantic. All the waters from the west side flow to the north up into Hudson Bay. A very, very emotional moment for the paddlers. And next was Lake Superior, where they were escorted by 3 ships. They were Canadian coastal patrol ships, big ships. Tin foil was wrapped around a paddle in each canoe and stuck up in the back of the canoe to act as a reflector for radar to pick up the ships so that ships knew where they were. They paddled through huge waves and fog. They followed the ships for 9 hours at a time through wind and rain and were tossed up and down by the enormous waves. It made them feel like they were floating in space. At Sault Ste. Marie, they got out to experience going through the locks used by ocean-going ships, and on through the north end of Lake Huron and Georgian Bay, where the waves were huge and the wind was fierce, and the paddlers were sometimes paddling about 85 to 90 strokes per minute to keep the canoes under control. The paddlers from Montreal that paddled out to Grand Portage paddled the big 36-foot canoes, but these guys were paddling their 25-foot canoes. Paddling on the narrow Mattawa and Ottawa rivers provided its own challenges, but the teams were getting excited because they would soon be in Montreal. Their paddling patterns were getting so automatic they were doing it in their sleep. All day they would paddle about 15 strokes, then one of them would call, 1, 2, 3, change, and they all slide to the other side of the boat. It became so automatic that a reporter from Ottawa said, One night, when they were all bedded down, one crewman who talks in his sleep shouted, 1, 2, 3, change! And the entire tent rocked as they all responded to the command. A little poetic license, I think. When the Centennial Voyageurs arrived in Ottawa, they were treated to a wonderful banquet in a wing of the Parliament building, where they even had butlers serving them wine. John Fisher, the commissioner, told the voyageurs, "If it had not been for the birch bark canoe and the rhythm of paddles, the West would be far behind in development now. You have stirred the hearts of Canadians. You are the heroes of our centennial year."
Finally, the last day of the race arrived. They had to paddle through the mighty Lachine Rapids on the St. Lawrence River and on into the site of Expo 67. The rapids were fearsome with some big waves and holes. Some canoes took on large amounts of water. One totally filled with water and tipped, but with the help of safety boats, everyone made it through safely and were able to paddle on to Expo Island and the sprint race they would do in front of hundreds of thousands of people. The voyageurs knew that this sprint race was going to be one of the most exciting events of their entire lives. The sprint was meant to wow the people, and wow it did, even to the colorful costumes they wore. When they first came into the lake where they were going to do the sprint race, all the paddlers were in the canoe, all 10 members of the team. But when they did the actual sprint race, there was only 6 back in, of course. It was a tight race with lots of races within the race, and seconds separated the first 3 teams. But Manitoba took the lead. The paddlers could hardly hear the signals that they gave over the din of the crowd. Most spectators had never seen a voyageur canoe before, and this pageant brought Canadian history to life for them. They crossed the finish line, exhausted and thrilled, excited and exhilarated all at the same time. A final hurrah was made when the paddlers rushed toward Colonel Matthews, the chief voyageur of the whole race, and unceremoniously picked him up and chucked him into the lake in full view of all the spectators and the delight of the crowd. At the end of the race, Manitoba's overall time beat the rest. 531 hours of racing across Canada. Second was British Columbia, followed by Alberta. Only 4 hours separated them. What a thrilling finish to the longest canoe race in the world and to the end of the Centennial Canoe Pageant. One paddler said, "It was a wonderful experience. I will never forget the friends I made and the things I learned on this marvelous trip, voyageur style, across the most beautiful country I have seen, Canada." You can find out more about this exciting canoe pageant and race in a book called Paddling, Portaging, and Pageantry. Our next video tells you about some of the other epic voyageur canoe events, including the 2017 Centennial Canoe Race from Rocky Mountain House to the Paw. It left this site that I'm standing on right here on July 1st. It was quite an exciting event as well. Hope you can join us for that one. Bye for now.